Hey there, welcome to The Colour Couch, which is brought to you through Laopost and presented by me, Vincent Taylor. Now, if you don't know who Laopost is, then hold everything, go check them out. They're an awesome creative learning platform that's for everything you need to know in this crazy post-production world. If you don't know who I am, I'm a wannabe talk show host who says too much and has a day job as a colorist. Actually, sometimes that day job is a night job as well. Enjoy the podcast. You're sitting on the Colour Couch with Vincent Taylor. I'm a colorist for film, television, and everything in between. When my clients come into the colour grading suite to work on their projects, they sit on this colour couch of mine for an hour, a day, or weeks on end, depending on the project. Those clients might be directors, writers, producers, or cinematographers. It varies considerably depending on the project. Now, while working on the project, we talk about a whole bunch of interesting things. Sometimes it's colour, but not necessarily. And that is what the Colour Couch is all about. It's a glimpse behind the curtain of film and television. The podcast will talk about colour from time to time, but it's really about what brought my clients, my guests, to the Colour Couch. How do they get to this place in this crazy industry, and what keeps them coming back? I love the conversations I have, and my hope is that you'll love them too. So squeeze in, there's plenty of room, cuddle one of my Bill Murray cushions, and let's have a chat on the Colour Couch. Welcome to the Colour Couch. This is Vincent Taylor, your host. I've got my buddy Tyler Robinson here. He is a colorist at MPC, and he's painfully aware of my podcast recordings. But he's let me in on a little secret. Go on, tell me about the warm-up.
So there's one warm-up I used to do in my choir days.
Okay.
But pretty much just goes like this. You say the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue.
The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue.
The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue.
The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue.
Enunciate. Articulate. Exaggerate.
And
then you say it faster and faster. So you go like the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue. The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue. Enunciate, articulate, exaggerate. And then you just like say it faster and faster. And
so when you did it yesterday and I cracked up, I thought, oh, that's a really great way to start the podcast. But what does it actually do? It just warms up your vocal cords? And
it warms up your vocal cords, your articulation, and it just gets you like talking very succinctly.
The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, and enunciate?
Enunciate, articulate, exaggerate.
The lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, enunciate, exaggerate.
Enunciate, articulate, exaggerate.
All right, well, we're going to have a chat to Tyler in a little while. I definitely want to do an episode with him and talk with him about what it is to be an assistant and his pathway to colour grading and why he's interested in that. But I'm going to put Tyler on ice and I'll come back to you. Thank you for helping me with my enunciation.
No problem.
And so hopefully now I'm all warmed up and you'll be ready for my next guest. So welcome to the Colour Couch. Sitting on the Colour Couch with me today is my very special guest, Alan Bibby. I'm your host, Vincent Taylor, and if I'm really good, I'll edit this together and it's going to sound amazing. But Alan just asked me what this show's all about. So normally I've only done one episode. So in the previous episode, I did a little spiel beforehand about what the Colour Couch is about, but Alan has very kindly asked me what it's about, which is a brilliant setup, right?
Life of service.
Yeah.
I love to serve.
Yeah. Do I have to pay you for that? No. Great.
Payment in kind.
So even though it's called the Colour Couch, and even though it takes place in a colour grading suite, and even though I'm a colorist, the podcast is not necessarily about colour. It's about what brings people to the Colour Couch and what their connection is with this industry or with this room or with myself. And the last podcast that I did, I don't believe we mentioned colour once. You know, we just talked about what got the guys to where they are now. So a little bit of backstory. So I met Alan when I was working as a colorist in Shanghai. and Alan came over to do a car commercial, and we wore pajamas in the color grading suite. But we'll get back to that later. First off, just to kind of introduce you, what's your background and what is your job?
I'm a director, mainly commercials, music videos, shorts. Everything is very short form. I'm not saying it won't be, but I kind of exist in that world where it's a poem rather than a novel. And that's something that I love. I love that world where everything has to be communicated within 30 seconds or within 4 minutes. It's always been something that fascinated me because I come from a design background, fine arts background, rather than a filmmaking background. So for me, the idea that you have this very, very short window of time to communicate with people and to try and communicate ideas, stories, narratives, concepts is much more in the world of like what I'm used to in terms of like a print design or a still image. So that's kind of the world that I exist. A lot of the work that I do is, revolves around my fascinations and interests. I really believe that to do something well, you have to love it. So I do a lot of car work because I'm a huge gearhead. I do a lot of kind of fashion and tech because those are my obsessions. And that idea that we have this kind of this sandbox to play in, and I'm incredibly fortunate that people will actually not only pay me to do it, but also pay the money to actually produce all of these things. It's something that I feel very, very lucky and grateful for. But so I exist in that sort of sphere, that sort of world where it sits in the kind of the advertising sphere, or the kind of the cross between advertising and technology and music, and that to me is just very, very fertile ground.
So you mentioned a design background. So we have certainly one thing in common, and that is where we were brought up. So, but tell me about where you're from originally, and then you went to design school, or how did you get into this?
Yeah, I grew up in New Zealand, like Aotearoa, to first generation immigrants. My mother was from South Africa, my dad English. They met in South Africa. Didn't want to raise kids there because obviously, apartheid. It was a pretty dark period there, and they moved sight unseen to New Zealand. And I was raised in a really beautiful kind of bucolic oceanic life, and I never really knew what I wanted to do. I knew that both my parents, although they were both scientists and academics, they were both intensely creative humans. And so I never really knew what I wanted to do. I was fascinated by, I was a big reader. I was fascinated by art. I kind of studied physics and economics and just this really kind of scattershot sort of thing. And when it was time to go to university, my parents had a very open-minded attitude towards it, where they were like, we don't care what you study, but you have to study something. You have to go to university and study something. So I was like, I don't know. Okay, I don't know. What's interesting? And my best friend at the time was going to design school. Victoria University, my alma mater, had just started a 4-year design program that was focused more on kind of theory and the academic aspects of design rather than it being a trade, which I think is how it had been perceived before that. So I was like, okay, well, I'll try and get in. I had a portfolio that I'd done on a trip with my parents, where it was just it was literally just drawings of, various kind of artifacts from the Vancouver Museum and some drawings from Italy, and somehow managed to get into art school based on that.
How old were you then?
I would have been 16. So my mother grew up in South Africa, but she had her parents were German. They'd fled Germany during the war, and so she'd had a very European upbringing. And when she saw me at age 15, losing interest in art, and she was really disturbed. She was like, why? You've always been fascinated by this, and now you don't want to do it anymore. You don't want to go to class. You don't want to do anything. And she's like, show me the work that you're doing. And I showed her, and I remember this very clearly. It was because New Zealand's an incredible place. It is about as far as you can get from anywhere else in the world as well. So we were studying Botticelli, and I'm like, yeah, we're studying Botticelli's Venus. And it's a black and white photocopy 4 inches across. And I'm like, I don't know why this is interesting. She looked at it and she's like, I absolutely get it. So, she put us on a plane and we went through Europe and saw all of the originals of these pieces that I'd been studying but like had no interest in. And they're like, and I remember just going to the Louvre and just being like just so blown away. And I'm like, now I get it. So I had all of these drawings that I'd done over that trip, which was, this kind of reconnection with like why these are such amazing pieces of art and human endeavor. And so that somehow got me into art school. And I think I was like out of the entire crop, because it was like, a large, I think it was like 300 people going for 50 places or something. And I was like number 50 that got picked. Like I just scraped in. And so I did that and then cross-credited that with all of my university courses, because I also was going for a BA in psychology. So I was cross-crediting, these design courses and photography courses with psych and statistics and Middle English literature and that sort of thing. So it was just this weird scattershot education that I kind of put together myself, just because I was like, okay, well, this seems interesting and that seems interesting. And weirdly enough, rather than the typography courses or the photography courses, it's been those weird other ones, like the Middle English literature, the stats courses, the algebra courses, which have actually, really, if I look back, helped me and kind of like steered me and given me the tools to actually do this.
Tell me how, and this is not a set up question because I totally get that about when you mentioned algebra, but mathematics, how does mathematics inform you as an artist?
Well, as I was getting to my kind of like thesis project, like to my 4th year of school, I became really obsessed with people like John Mader, like MIT Media Labs, and his thinking, because, at the time I was very much into semiotics. I was very much into, deconstructionists, that sort of thing. That at the time in the kind of like the design world and the art world, there was this real push towards using literary theory as a basis for, creation of art and culture. So, things like David Carson, Reagan Magazine, he was looking at kind of like the deconstructionists as a tomato, like all of those. Because again, the crossover with music, it was like album covers that got me into wanting to make art and wanting to make music videos, that sort of thing.
That's great.
And so I started getting into kind of like people like John Mader, and their whole thing was like, look, if you're using a tool, what you're going to create is always going to be based around the tool. If you're going to be using Photoshop, you're going to be creating work that the designers of Photoshop and the writers of Photoshop thought that you should be able to do. The things that are easy or the things that are possible are things that they thought that you should do. So you're following their program. You're not following your program. So Mader was a big fan of kind of like creating your own tools. So, and how do you do that if you're working in a digital medium, which, I mean, everyone does to some extent these days, is you create your own tools and you write your own tools. So I taught myself how to code. I was using the software at the time where it was like, I had to learn like JavaScript, I had to learn Java, I had to learn Macromedia Director was one of the pieces of software, and all of the algebra and all of the stats was like how I could actually do things like write like a rudimentary 3D engine to kind of like actually make my own art. So I got very much into that. VRML, which was kind of like an early VR kind of 3D coding language to like actually kind of start to build your own worlds, which like now seems very obvious. Like, we have like Unity and Unreal and that sort of real-time engine, but at the time it was like incredibly, like forward thinking. So, that's kind of what I got like really into and really obsessed by. And when I left school, that's all I wanted to do. Just wanted to kind of like lock myself in a dark room and make these weird kind of code-based, algorithmic-based pieces of art. And swiftly realized that even that alongside a dishwasher job wasn't going to be able to feed me. So I started having to look outside of that and, re-entering the kind of like commercial business world. But, that was, what all of those other kind of like weird classes and kind of like viewpoints and various teachers and mentors like gave me was the ability to kind of realize that I didn't have to follow this strict path. And like, it wasn't about kind of, okay, you come out of here and you're gonna become a photographer because you did the photography stream. You're gonna become a graphic designer. You're going to go and work in an ad agency. I was like, I don't know. I mean, seems like there's a lot of other really interesting things that I could actually kind of all feed into making my own work.
It's interesting. The last week or so, I haven't been back to New Zealand for so many years, but I started to go down a bit of a memory lane. And whenever I think about, I grew up in Auckland, and whenever I think about New Zealand, I go straight to my memories of going through that beautiful museum and the gallery there, and paintings that I don't know, that I was just drawn to, and they're so clear in my brain. For you, I mean, it sounds like your mum and your dad, they really supported you and encouraged you. But do you have those things that you just, when you think back to growing up there, that are very clear?
Oh,
touchstones?
Oh yeah, you mean specifically in the kind of like in terms of like art and inspiration and that sort of thing? Yeah. I mean, it's like, both of my parents, again, that were like, like hardcore academics, scientists. My mother, trained as a low temperature physicist. She was working as like at the kind of birthplace of digital computing when they were trying to get room temperature superconductors to increase the speed of my father was a nuclear physicist, but they were both, if they'd have grown up in different times or different opportunities, they're both incredible artists, like in their kind of like later life, like they both paint, they both have, like just incredible eye, and that's become their focus later on. My father moved from, hardcore science to science management to science politics to ending up the vice chancellor of the university that I went to after I was there, and the head of the design school, which I found fascinating because I was like, rather than it being something where I think generally you kind of like follow your parents' footsteps. I'm like, you're following mine. But I mean, they were always, like art and music was a huge part of my childhood. And, we were very lucky. Like Wellington is a tiny little city. It's the capital, but I mean, Auckland is really the capital. It's like 1.5 million people, which is still only about 4 city blocks in New York. But Wellington has always been just such an incredible cultural center, like both from music to art to, everything from plays to just culture in general. And especially at the time, it was incredibly fertile, like tiny, like 400,000 people. But the museums were always great. The galleries were always amazing. I remember my parents taking me to see, I think it was a like Corbusier like exhibition, and I didn't believe that the buildings were real. Like I thought it was all kind of concept art. I'm like, are those real buildings? It's like, yeah, they are, and that blowing me away. I remember the classic, going and seeing like a abstract impressionist exhibition, and I'm like, I don't think that's art. I could do that, and it's like my mum just being like, well, you didn't,
Yeah.
Like you think of something and do that, then yeah, it might only be like 4 lines. But they're the right 4 lines, and they're 4 lines that evokes emotion and evokes thought.
It's such a, I mean, gosh, the number of times, and I'm definitely guilty of it, and not as a young man, but even as an older guy, going to a gallery, seeing something, going, that's so simple. But I didn't do it.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing. Again, when you kind of like, as you get older and you kind of like, you get a chance to interrogate your process, and you realize, like I've always been, again, my process has always been kind of rooted in that kind of design mentality, which is very empirical, where it's, it's like the empirical method is like, yes, there might be intuitive jumps, but it's like a bulldozer. Like it might get there, it's going to get there in the end. You try this, it doesn't work. You try this, it doesn't work. Try this, it doesn't work. And it's all of those realizing what doesn't work that gets you to the thing that does. So, what you might end up doing might only take you 30 minutes, but it might have taken you 3 months to find out that right 30 minutes. And as I've got older, I've learned to respect that in my process, that it doesn't matter that the end result was only 30 minutes of work. Like it took you 400 hours to find what that 30 minutes was. And that's essential. So just to kind of allow yourself to make those mistakes, to figure out what it doesn't need to be. And also like realizing what that process is in terms of collaboration, because I mean, that's, again, it's, if I go back to when I left university and I didn't, what I saw as my process was a very solitary one. And then realizing what I love about what I do now is that it's intensely collaborative and intensely social. And it's all of these amazing people with their amazing different abilities and experiences that are kind of, we're all going to go together and move together and end up with a result that's bigger than each one of us. But realizing what other people's process is as well and how mine can tie into theirs. Like even when trying to, if you're asking someone to take it too far, so you know that it's too far and then dial it back, which I always thought was kind of a failing. Or when someone is asking you to do that, like, can you do that? And you're like, well, it's going to be too much. Like, I think this is good. But realizing that we have to try just to know that is too far and come back.
I mean, I do that even in simple terms in colour grading. I was doing some teaching a couple of weeks ago for some kids and showing them with colour and I was saying, okay, let's put some more green in that. And I'd see them all just edging it in. I say, no, put heaps in. Yeah. Put heaps in, and then come back. Yeah. Let's go too far and then come back.
Let's find our limits. Like that. I mean, we always joke about the whole split the difference thing, which is like the most basic cliche kind of comment that you get from a director or an agency creative or whatever. Like, okay, it's this, now it's this. Can we just go right to the middle? And it's just like, it's like, why are you saying that? It's the most basic thing. But there's a truth in that in terms of like, okay, I asked you to push it here just so I know that it's too far. Like that's where we don't want to go. Okay, let's dial it back again.
I get clients who are conscious that phrase is very, very common. And so I get all these very creative ways of them saying it without saying it.
Absolutely. It's like you need to put up like color suite bingo on the wall with all of those kind of sort of things. Like just have fun with it.
Just have fun.
Split the difference, crush the blacks.
All right. So you've gone from design school, you've gone into a place of directing. Now was that still in New Zealand or did you?
No, I mean, it's one of those weird things that I was talking about this at Semi-Permanent Design Conference a few years back, where if you look back, hindsight's 2020, and you look back and it seems like everything made total sense in terms of like your progression that got you where it feels like a straight shot. And, but like it absolutely wasn't. Like I made what would quite conclusively the wrong decision at every point. Like at every point, like I made the decision to do something that I found personally interesting rather than something that was a good career move, whether that was financially or in terms of establishing myself or anything like that. So I made this kind of serpentine kind of path through all of these different fields. I mean, I've worked as a graphic designer, as a web designer, as a writer, as a script writer, as an agency creative, as a photographer, as a music video director, as a commercial director. And it was in finding that sort of path, like each one of these things has informed me and added to what I do now in various ways. But at the time it was like, I would see other friends of mine who knew exactly what they wanted to do and we're just like laser focused on getting to that point. And I'm like, I don't know, like I'm doing this. This is feeding certain parts of my mind. And
do you think, talking about 2020 vision or looking back, do you think that those friends were laser focused or were they doing a similar thing where they were?
Well, I mean, some of them, yes, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. And I've always like really respected that. That's not me. But it's like, they knew exactly what they wanted to do and they were going for it. And a lot of them have been incredibly successful. That's what they put the time into. That's what they put their 100,000 hours into. And others have kind of achieved that goal and then realized that they didn't actually want that goal as well, because it was a decision that they made when they were quite young. But I mean, I've also like my peer group, especially, I'm talking about New Zealand and about Wellington, about how fertile it was. Like, I don't know whether there was something in the water, but if I look at my year and at school and that sort of thing, and like, the people that have come out of that, it's an incredible crop of people. I mean, like you have like Taika, who just won an Oscar for Jojo Rabbit. You have Brett and Jermaine, who've done incredibly well as Flight of the Conchords. You've got Toby Barrord, who created Love and Hip Hop, like one of the biggest franchises in American television. You have like Carlo Vanderohe, who's like, developed this, his own proprietary technology and lighting systems. It's like, it's an amazing group and year and couple of years of people. But a lot of those guys, like some of them knew exactly what they wanted to do, and some of them kind of like thought that they really wanted this, and then realized that in fact they wanted this. And but you know, everyone has their own route and their own kind of way to get to where they're happy. And you know, some people need more experimentation. I mean, for me, it was definitely, you know, I like these aspects of doing that, but I don't like the very kind of solitary aspect. There's not that kind of mystery and synergy that comes from working with other people. I like doing this, but I want more control. You know, it's very much a kind of a path of kind of a journey of exploration. But again, you look back and you're like, oh, everything makes sense. But at the time it's very much like, I don't know, well, I'm going to try this because it fascinates me.
So as far as that route that you took, so here you are now in New York City. So how long have you been here?
I've lived here almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is home?
This is home. I mean, it's like half my life. This is where I'm raising my son. It's not somewhere that I'd been to New York before, and before I moved here for good. I moved here in 99, and I'd been here before, and it just didn't click with me. And, you know, I moved here with a girlfriend, and she, you know, I'd come out of a long distance relationship. I didn't want another one. I'd moved back from Europe to New Zealand, and she moved to New York because, you know, she got a scholarship to Columbia. And I was like, fine, I'll move here. It's difficult. I got to get a visa. I don't want to live in New York. And, you know, that relationship didn't last very long. But by that point, I'd fallen in love with the city. I'd fallen in love with New York. And the city's gone through so many changes, but it still has a magic that I still love. I still fall in love with the city every day. But the opportunities that it gives you is incredible because it is difficult to live here. It's like it smells in the summer and it's cold in the winter and it's incredibly expensive and, you know, it'll crush your dreams on the regular. But everyone who lives here wants to live here. It's difficult to live here. So you're surrounded by people who are driven and exceptional and interested in life and focused on that. And that is just priceless. I mean, that's what I love. I love the people I know. I love the people that I randomly meet. It's like you can randomly meet someone in a restaurant or a bar and they're fascinating. And that's something I don't think you get many other places in the world.
What have you been working on recently?
I've just come out of a 6-month burn of commercials and campaigns, which has been amazing and very intense. So I went from doing a concept film for Lexus to campaign for new campaign for Chevy, to working for Goodyear tires, to working with Paula Abdul, to like just back to back. And so now, you know, with all of that, which like again is work that I'm very proud of, but is very much in the kind of commercial filmmaking sphere, I'm, you know, now taking a minute to kind of get my feet on the ground again. Like I haven't been in New York for 6 months. So connect with my life here again, but also, you know, just do some projects that are more just passion based. I'm doing a music video for a young rapper next week, which I just really like his music. It's just like, he's, you know, this really interesting young kid from Hell's Kitchen, and the music's great. You know, he's an amazing poet, and, you know, just doing something with that, just being able to say, okay, you know, like we can take all of our skills and experience and contacts and do something which is going to be really amazing and interesting with very little money. So that, I've got a couple of other projects on the boil which have, you know, a more cause-based, which I think is also really important. Like balancing the commercial work with something that you feel is important, whether in this case sustainability and the environment, and thinking about how we can use our skill sets and our contacts, etc., to like actually do something to raise awareness for things that are incredibly important.
When you come into a project, and I would imagine that this would vary wildly, but maybe it doesn't, where do you start?
It really depends. You're right. It varies very, very differently. I mean, because I get brought into projects at very, very different points. Like again, like my experience is really wide ranging. Like I've worked as an agency creative, I've worked as a writer, I've worked as a concept artist, I've worked as a graphic designer, I've worked as a director. So when I'm brought in, it can really vary what the ask is. Like it might be something where it's a very, you know, traditional, you know, like, okay, we've worked on the script, we've sold it through, here's the agency boards. We want you to, bring your vision and your twist to it, but just go and shoot this. And it's like, okay, like I can slot in at that point. Or it could be something where it's like, we don't really have a concept, we have a problem. Can you help us solve this problem? And the end result might be something, it might be a film, it might be a suggestion as to like how they change their business model. It could be anything. And I find those very, very interesting as well. I've been doing a lot of client direct work over the last couple of years, and that idea of just being able to embed within a problem and then figure out what the solution is. So, there's no script, there's no tagline, there's no boards. It's starting at that point where it's open. Like, we don't even know. This might be a campaign, this might be print, this might be, we actually need to just hire a couple of people to do this sort of thing. And that's one thing that I find very fascinating. So, but those are the extremes. Like, one, it might be just something where like, we want you to cast some people and find locations and shoot this. And it's very not straightforward, because the reason why this work is interesting is that it's never straightforward. But there's a very obvious process. Or it could be something where you're starting right at the start and everything is open.
Would you say as a director that you have a specific strength, like, performance or design, or is it like an amalgamation of all of those things?
I really think, it's interesting. It's because that's something that, we talk about a lot. I talk about with my friends and colleagues a lot, like, because, everyone wants to pigeonhole. And this is something that's always been very, very difficult for me because, like even like 10 years ago with my body of work, I would take it to friends of mine, EPs or production companies. And they're like, look, your stuff's great, but like you have this kind of sort of doco work, and then you have this like this heavy design based stuff and this animation work, and then cars, and then this kind of weird high fashion art stuff, and like we don't see the connective tissue there. Like, and I'm like, I don't know, it makes sense to me. And it took years to kind of build that connective tissue. So now when I show my body of work, my reel, they're like, okay, like I get who you are. But it's difficult if you don't, like if you're someone who's just like, I shoot cars, or I'm a comedy guy, or like a visual comedy, or whatever, then it's very easy for people to kind of say, okay, you're the guy who does this, and we've got a board that needs your set of skills. It's only been very recently that the feedback that I get is something where people get it. Like there was something which I found really interesting and almost a justification about a year ago, where a creative director that I'd worked for years and years before came with a campaign, and they're like, look, we want Alan to help us solve this because he's good at solving things. We don't know what this has to be. We've got an initial idea, we've got our ask from our client, but we don't know what that thread is to solve this and bring this all together. And Alan's very good at that. So that was something I was like, yeah, that is what I'm good at. That is where, I can go and shoot stuff. There's people who are better visual stylists than me. I know tons of them personally. There's people who are better actors, directors, who come from actors and really understand performance much better than me. There's people who, my whole thing is like, I'm not particularly funny, I'm not a comedy director. It's,
which is for me totally bizarre because you're hilarious.
But I'm not funny on film.
You're such your humor is so, for me, in my experience, is just so quick, and so it does surprise me that you say that.
It really doesn't translate to film. I'm very unfunny. So and I've heard this from many people, but it's so hearing that, and I was like, yeah, that is what I'm good at. Like I'm good at, and that's why my work has this like big disparity, because the through thread of all of these things is like figuring out that kind of like that thread that like this is what's important, and whether that's a like a kinetic type piece, or whether that's just a really honest piece of like documentary human filmmaking. Like that's the kind of the thread that goes through it. It's like kind of like finding into this like this line of truth, and then focusing everything around that.
So is there something that you haven't done in your career that you go, I'd really like to do comedy, or I'd really like to do? Is there something like that, or are you kind of content for those things to come up organically?
There's absolutely things that I really want to do. There's that. The work that I'm doing right now is a stepping stone towards.
I see.
And in the same way that I was saying that, I love the kind of like the short film, short form koan poem sort of idea. There are just stories that you can't tell in that format. And those are the stories that I grew up in and grew up surrounded by and love. Like I'm an obsessive reader, and, the kind of like being able to build something that you can only tell even beyond, feature film length, like more kind of, if I look at like the episodic format or like an anthology format, like that's the stories that I want to tell fit very well into that. Like if you look at something like a Twilight Zone or a Black Mirror or that sort of thing, where they can be different stories, they can be different worlds, they can be different world building, but there's an overarching message that all of these different things fit in. So that's my next step is moving into kind of like take everything that I already do and then be able to kind of like the stories that I love and the stories that I'm obsessed by and the stories that I write, how do I then take these techniques and this experience and then use that to tell those stories?
So are you saying that would be something episodic then, potentially?
I'm fascinated by the format because I figured this out. It's funny, like looking back, the first time that I really realized that, like sitting there looking at narrative arcs, it was 24, which has not dated well. But when 24 came out and that idea that, there were 24 hour-long episodes and it was in real time or close to it, but how do you can't use just like a traditional 3-act structure over a 24-hour period. And I watched it like literally, I remember it was like in Paris watching it on DVDs and just sitting up, like we would sit up for 10 hours and not go to sleep, like jet lagged and just like watch 10 hours in a row of this. And it's like, okay, so there's the big kind of 3-act structure, like traditional, like Joseph Campbell sort of thing. But then within those, and that's what each one of those is 8 hours. And within that, there's 3 acts. And each one of those is like 3 hours. And within that, there's 3 acts. And it's kind of like fractal sort of thing and storytelling to the point where like each hour has like 3 acts and kind of like, it's got a turning point and it's got like an intention, an obstacle. And then that then fits into the larger one. And I became, like realizing at the time, because that was before binge watching was really a thing, because also those shows were like once a week, and seeing how that's like transferred to like the Netflixes and the Hulus, where they will release a whole season, like 10 hours in one go, and people will sit and watch it. So the idea that you can get, there's negatives, of course. Like I love the experience of going to movies. I love the fact that I turn my phone off and I'm committed 100% to watching this piece of art for an hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours if you want to talk about The Irishman. But and you don't get that when someone's sitting there watching Netflix on their laptop in bed. But what you do get is they will sit and commit to you for 10 hours. Like what's the kind of story you can tell in 10 hours is different from the story that you can tell in an hour, and deeper and richer. And you can really investigate who characters are and what how they feel about certain things, and it can change. You can have evolution through this period. So I find that fascinating. And I look at shows like Chernobyl and the world building that goes into that.
It's incredible.
And I just find that so phenomenal. I look at that and I'm just like, what an absolutely fantastic piece of work.
I was thinking as you were saying that that thing about going to the cinema, turning off your phone, being lost in that world is a huge part of it. And then the other part is experiencing a film with other people in the cinema.
Shared experience.
But then I thought about that from an episodic point of view. You pick something like, Breaking Bad or one of these big things that becomes this phenomena, and it becomes this shared experience, this water cooler talk, or it becomes this, oh my gosh, did you see the latest? So it becomes a different shared experience, doesn't it? Not happening in an hour and a half, but happening over weeks and weeks.
Yeah. It's like, because I think that idea, that's something that drives us as humans, is to like how do we connect? I look at why do people drink? Why do people do drugs? It's like kind of like, I've never been chasing my demons away for that sort of thing. It's like I feel like a lot of the time, like those, it's not the fact of getting out of your head, it's getting into the same mind state as other people. So we're doing the same drugs together. We're all drinking together to find some commonality. And that, if I look at art, it's we're sitting and like watching this movie together, and we've all committed this, and we have the most similar, we're sitting in the same room and it's dark and we're all experiencing that sort of thing. We're all experiencing it at the same time. I find that very special. But the other thing that I find fascinating, which again kind of like loops back to what I was doing when I left school, was, I'm fascinated by this idea of a created experience, which moves beyond screens. And I would always joke about the fact when I started moving into doing more car stuff, which I love because I love automotive filmmaking. I am a unashamed, no irony, Fast and the Furious fan. I will sit there and watch any single one of those movies just quite happily. I'll watch Bullet. I'll watch City Rendezvous. And just for the car choreography and that sort of thing. But I would always joke that I don't get the sheet metal spots. I mean, the irony is that now I do get just the sheet metal spots, and people don't know that I come from a design background and don't know that I come from this sort of background. But I would get the weird experiential jobs. So I did work for Castrol and Lexus, where it's these big stunts, and there's an aspect of that I love that goes beyond kind of just traditional filmmaking. When we go, we do a shoot, it's never going to turn out exactly how you expected, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But there's always this process. It's not in real time. Then you go and you edit it. And you might tell a different story in the edit. Sometimes you have to. We didn't quite get what we wanted, but we can tell it in a different way. You have visual effects, you have post-production, you have color, you have sound design, all to kind of craft this. And what I loved about the work that was more these weird experiential things, it was almost a live event. It was almost a stunt. There were people there that had to work in the moment. And this idea that there's total skin in the game, that if it doesn't work right now, there's no saving it. There's no cutaway. There's no oh, let's take it, do another take. It has to work. That I find really fascinating. And, was
exciting.
It's super exciting and super and terrifying, but in the best way. You're present. You're in the moment and it has to work. And, when I look at, even things like Sleep No More, I think were the precursor of a lot of this sort of stuff. But then when I look at, this idea of friends of mine just did the marketing for The Irishman. I don't know if you saw it, went down in Little Italy.
I was told about it, yeah.
Yeah, and they took over 2 blocks of Mott Street, where, Umberto's Clam House, where that's Hoffa, So, and they took it over, and for 2 days, they turned it into Hoffa era Little Italy. They got all of these actors and they were all in period costumes, and they changed all the signage and all of the cars.
They had newspapers.
And newspapers were handing out. And it was literally going back in time, but also the way that they set it up. So when you just went there, there'd be all of these actors interacting with each other, but also interacting with you. And you would go through, and your experience of that was this kind of this fascinating, and they filmed it, and it the films and the collateral and all of that sort of thing, that's all incredible, and that all becomes its own thing, the campaign surrounding it. But something like that I find super fascinating, almost a new form where it's not a play, it's not a movie, but it is all of the techniques that you're setting up, the production design, the kind of the actors, their intentions, all of that sort of thing, and then setting someone loose in there. That I find very, very fascinating right now.
So you mentioned that you're an avid reader. So if there is a book that you would recommend to somebody at the moment, I mean, what's a book that comes to mind that you love?
I mean, I love world building. I love writers who are in love with words. I love reading books where you're literally just dragged with them by their literary prowess. I've always been obsessed with writers like Thomas Pynchon or David Foster Wallace, where it's Gravity's Rainbow. I think I probably read 10 times, and the first time I read it, I had no idea what it was about. I literally felt like I'd got off a roller coaster at the end of it. Just I don't know what that was, but I want to do it again. And the second time I read it, I sort of understood what happened. And the third time I read it, I sort of understood the themes behind it. There's a writer, Nick Harkaway, that I really love right now, who there's a book, Gnomon, that I've read it maybe 3 times now. It's a big chunker, thick book. And he, the first time I read it, I was I don't know what that was, but I liked it. And taking, that's, books that have that kind of density and that rereadability, and that, what they can give you changes depending on when in your life you are, I find fascinating. So yeah, No One's a fascinating book because like it's got these kind of like these, these 3 or 4 intertwined braids that go through it. But when you start up here, like they're completely disparate, and then you start to see thematic kind of echoes between them, and then they're just weaved together as it finishes in just such a virtuoso fashion, but in a way that makes you realize that you have to start reading that again immediately to then really understand what each one of these was about.
Is it an older book?
It's recent. It's his latest one. I think all of his books are fantastic. I read a book recently I loved. This Is How You Lose the Time War, and it's set in a world where time travel is possible, and there's 2 mutually antagonistic societies in the deep future who are trying to change the past to make their future happen. So, like doing various things, and like at the fall of Troy, or in First World War or whatever, like finding these touch points in history to change things so that their future is the one that happens. So you have one which is like garden written agency and that sort of thing. But the whole story is told by these soldiers who are like sent back, these 2 soldiers who are sent back in time to do these specific acts that will change the future. And the whole story is just told from letters from one to the other, and they fall in love. So it's love letters sent backwards and forwards by these kind of like these avatars of these mutually antagonistic, very different societies, and just like seeing them slowly kind of like learn each other and fall in love. And it's just a very beautiful story, and complex and emotional and also very, very human.
I think that through everything that you've told me today, I mean, this comes as no surprise to me, from your background to the way that you've been talking about bouncing off things to find the path that you're on. The one common thread which speaks to me so clearly is that you're a storyteller. Like, you love storytelling, you love reading stories, you like being connected with that. Now, in fairness to the people who are listening, I touched on exciting adventure of pajamas in the colour suite. So maybe we can finish with that anecdote.
I think that's a great place to finish. So we met in Shanghai, colouring a Volkswagen spot. And I think the time that I'd been to Shanghai before, I had been fascinated by all of the old Chinese gentlemen wearing pajamas on the street. And, Shanghai is one of those cities that changed drastically every time that I've been there, like so rapidly. The first time I went there, like I had 2 pieces of paper, and one had the name of the hotel that I was staying at written in Mandarin, and the other one had the name of the production company. And all I could do was like give one of these pieces of paper to a taxi driver. No one spoke English. There was no Google Maps at the time, no Google Translate, and I could go backwards and forwards to the production. And anytime I left and went somewhere, like I was just so lost. It was terrifying. And one of the things was seeing these old Chinese guys walking down the street in their pajamas. And I was like, why are they doing that? And a friend of mine who lived there was like, it's a symbol of wealth. Like, they're showing off. They're like, I'm so well off. I've got clothes just to sleep in. Like you see, I'm made it. Like, you got clothes. I got separate clothes. I just sleep in. Like, you see this? It's like, and I found that hysterical, and just that it was this way of just completely flossing and flexing. And so when you and I met, we were doing color, and we were like, we need some of these old man pajamas to flex. And so we got Lily to go and buy his pajamas and the little flip-flops, the little slippers,
right. We had
the matching slippers, and got dressed and did all of our color like that. Not realizing that, well, we thought it was funny, but like everyone at the post house thought that we were completely mental.
They did, didn't they?
They thought we were completely crazy. Like, what is wrong with these guys? And we were like, look at us.
But I remember people kept like...
they were taking photos of us.
People
was
would just pop in and take photos.
Yeah, exactly. we're like, look, we're acclimatized.
That's it.
We're locals now.
And just in case anyone is wondering, yes, we are sitting here whilst we're recording in our pajamas.
Magic slippers.
Magic slippers. I will try to dig up. I've got a photo somewhere of that session of us in our pajamas. I'll try and put that in the show notes.
You have to.
And I will also link you to Alan's work. Thank you so much for taking time to chat to me. And as we were talking, I went, And this could be a two-parter, but I mean that in a lovely way, because there's so much more that I want to ask you and talk to you about. So who knows? Maybe for season 2 of the Colour Couch, I'll get you back again.
We'll come back.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Alan Bibby for being my guest on the Colour Couch. He's looking very good in his pajamas. Thank you to my executive producer, Amelia Chapello. The lovely music is from Chubby Tycoon. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate everyone for listening and for your super lovely feedback. Thank you. Keep colouring outside the lines, and I'll chat with you all again soon.